Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. This is David Gomez and I bring a speaker highlight this morning. I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Alex Sevilla, and he's the higher education executive. He's also a business school strategy, and he's one of our leadership speakers. So I want to take this time to welcome you and thank you for your time, Alex.
It's great to be here, David. Thanks for doing this.
And one of the things that we are doing with our speakers is we want to give you a chance to tell a little bit about yourself, about your upbringing, and share your story. Would you share your story with our audience?
Yeah, David. Again, thank you again. It's really an honor to be part of these conversations with Latino leaders. And, I think in thinking about my upbringing specifically, we'll get to more career conversations a little bit further in the discussion. I often do think about the classic relationship between nature and nurture as it pertains to leadership, which is where my background is and what I teach. And for me, my upbringing does shed some light on my life story and personal driving forces and aspirations. And I guess the best place to start would be thinking about how my life almost ended before it began. I was born in Managua, Nicaragua in October of 1972. And just 6 weeks later, Managua was hit with a devastating earthquake that destroyed the city and left over 10,000 people dead. My father at the time worked for Lanica Airlines. And so we were incredibly fortunate to be able to be one of the few families that was able to leave fairly quickly after the earthquake. And we settled in Miami, Florida, which is where I was raised. And I think part of my motivation for trying to get the most out of life and helping others where I can, probably at some basic level, is tied to the appreciation of just how fragile life is. Of course, I don't remember anything from the earthquake, but my life as I know it almost ended before it began. So, and then in terms of my upbringing with my family, growing up in Miami, I was one of 4 children in a loving home. Each one of my family members, I think, gave me something different above and beyond the relationship I have with them, and instilled something in me that I cherish. So my father, he spent countless nights working late. I remember him sitting at the kitchen table with a calculator and spreadsheets and just, really thinking about the value of hard work and sacrifice and what that meant. I think he also instilled a competitive spirit in me. I remember sharing his love of basketball and bowling, and there's nothing as satisfying as beating your dad as a child for the first time. And I remember like it was yesterday, the first time I beat him playing basketball in our backyard. It was like I had won the NBA finals. Although I have to say that I don't think I've ever known what it feels like to beat him in a game of bowling. He's really good, and I'm just not that good. My mother, on the other hand, she was really a source of early inspiration on so many levels. She was a stay-at-home mom early in my life, and then when family finances required it, she started to work first as a teacher and then ultimately pivoted to a successful career in higher ed. So early on, I think she really did sort of show me the value of helping others, and particularly students, even though I didn't really understood that connection at that time, which ultimately I think helped guide my life path. But perhaps more importantly, she was kind of our everything. She was our teacher, our coach, our disciplinarian, whatever we needed, she provided it, and really was kind of the pulse of our home. And I'm one of 4 children. So for my 3 siblings, while I won't go into detail about each one of them just for the purpose of time, I think in their own way, each one of them gave me skills or feelings or emotions that were part of my life story. So whether that's learning how to get along with other people in close quarters over extended periods of time, and figuring out what compromise means and when to hold your ground and things of that nature, embracing friendly competition, at least most of the time, and really just learning how to listen first. I was a middle child, so I wasn't the oldest, I wasn't the youngest, I was kind of right in between. Learning how to listen first, understand second, and then take action. So I think about that a lot as it relates to how I approach life as an adult, and I think part of that was built there. And then I know it wasn't necessarily part of your question as it relates to upbringing, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't share just how much my wife and my 2 kids have shaped me personally and professionally. I've been married to my best friend, Yessie, for 24 years. We have two amazing kids, Lauren and David. So great name, David. It's easy for me to remember your name, even if we weren't on Zoom, and I can see it there because that's my son's name. They're both in college now, and they're just unbelievable kids. They make us proud every single day. And my family is my life source. They're my safe haven. They give me energy. They give me inspiration to try to be the best person I can every single day.
That's a very rich story, and you're starting from your when your life started, and I think that gives you a really good appreciation of life, and enjoy every moment.
You got to.
Yeah, absolutely. So now a question: Did you know early on that you wanted to be an educator, or were there any events that led you in that journey?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and the answer is yes, but with a couple of twists along the way. So, growing up, I always enjoyed coaching and collaboration and everything that I did. I couldn't have defined it in that way at that time, of course, but whether it was in school, whether it was in sports, whether it was working with other people in early jobs that I had, I was really drawn to partnering with others before I even had any idea of what leadership was. One of the early sort of life-forming experiences that I had was every summer I worked as a camp counselor with young kids and in Miami again, and absolutely loved it. Really every aspect of it, probably with the exception of the humidity and heat in the summers in Miami. That was no fun, but we were outside and we were having a good time. So I think the love of teaching was always there. But when I went to college, David, like many others, and I'm so fortunate now to have the opportunity to mentor students who are in a similar situation, I didn't really understand how to translate my intrinsic passions and driving forces to a specific major or a career. So I ended up pursuing a business degree in marketing. I graduated, didn't put a lot of attention into my career search at the time, unfortunately. But I did graduate. I started a career in sales. I enjoyed the strategic elements of that role, but I knew pretty early on that it wasn't my life calling. I didn't have this, really driving motivation for getting up and going to work every single day. So at the time, I remember like it was yesterday, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, having these really thoughtful conversations about what wasn't working and what I might want to change. And we sort of circled back around to this idea of education, and that maybe being my life path. After a couple of tough conversations and saying, are we sure this is what I want to do, and does this make sense, and if I'm going to be a teacher, I probably am not going to have the most lucrative career financially as I might have otherwise, and we agreed that was the direction to take. So I returned to the University of Miami, which is where my undergraduate degree was completed, to pursue a master's degree in elementary ed. But this is sort of where the story turns the second time. So in order for me to pay for my graduate education, I quit my job and I took an entry-level role at the University of Miami. I knew some people in the business school from my time as a student. They had a position there. And I thought I was just such a smart thing to do. Like I could get a free education. I could be on a college campus. I was young. What could be better? I enjoyed being in that energy. So I took this role. And then from the moment I started working at the University of Miami in an administrative role, something really shifted in my mind. And for the first time in my life, everything sort of clicked in a professional context. I was involved in education, but in a different and more dynamic way than I had anticipated, just being in the classroom as a teacher. And what I discovered is I had sort of entered into the intersection of two passions of mine, education and business, helping others while building complex strategies and driving revenue, making a real difference for students in their lives while also meeting the needs of a number of key stakeholders. And I was just hooked. I absolutely loved it. And I immediately knew that I didn't know that I was going to build my entire career in this space, but I knew I wanted to give it a shot. So 1 year into my master's degree in elementary education, I shifted again and left the elementary ed master's degree and started an MBA. Again, I was working in the business school, so I was sort of immersed in that environment. So I completed an MBA. I stayed at the University of Miami for 5 years, was fortunate to have some really cool opportunities there. And then in 1998, was beyond blessed to have a great opportunity at the time where I was just starting my family with Yessie to pivot to the University of Florida, which is where I've been for the past 21 years. And I haven't looked back ever since. This intersection of business and education, which I could not have defined to you 30 years ago if you would have given me 100 chances to figure it out, is where I found a home. And I've loved it ever since. And I've had opportunities to do different things with my time and my career, but I just haven't found that niche in the same way that gives me as much intrinsic motivation as the work that I do here within a university setting.
Yeah, and you have had quite a bit of success I mean, and just from looking at the stats of the Wharton College, I see that you've been working on balance of diversity and inclusion, and I saw some of the stats that the website provides. What is the school doing right, if you don't mind sharing, to achieve that inclusion rate, and what lessons do you think other organizations can learn from those practices?
Yeah, I'd love to sort of answer this question in two ways. I do think that we have some things that we should be proud of that I'm happy to share. But I can also tell you, David, we have so much opportunity to be better here as well, both within the Wharton College as well as within the University of Florida. And I'm trying to be as assertive and involved in those conversations as possible at the university level, because I think there's more work that needs to be done. In terms of what we've done well, the university has done a really nice job of expanding enrollment to Hispanic and Latino students, which of course I'm thrilled to see. Within the Wharton College specifically, as an example, our Hispanic Latino enrollment has expanded to 21% of all of our undergraduate business students. So I serve as the dean of our undergraduate school of business. We have roughly 5,000 undergraduate business students here at UF. It's a really big place. And so we are at within the undergraduate population in the business school, 21% of our students are Hispanic, where it was just 14% 10 years ago. So that's really nice growth. And one of the programs that I'm most proud of being involved in, this is not a college level program specifically, it's a university level program, but I have the opportunity to be involved in it. It's something called the Matchin Florida Opportunity Scholars Program. It's a scholarship program that is exclusively for first generation students. The University of Florida provides 300 full scholarships each year to first-gen students. And I'm just honored to have the opportunity to work with these students through a number of engagements. I do speaking engagements, I do leadership development with them, I do some mentoring where I can. And I have to tell you, David, the stories of resilience and courage from these students not only is rewarding, that sort of goes without saying, but it creates motivation within me to think about, again, what we can do to be even more provocative and be even more direct in our ability to create diversity and inclusion, and particularly as it relates to first generation students. So in terms of how we can get better, because I think that's where I'd love to focus a little bit more of my time, because I think it's more instructive, and one, it sort of puts me on the spot to say, what are we going to do moving forward, as opposed to celebrating what we've done in the past. Yeah. I think there's necessary progress that can be made on several fronts. I do think that the university can and should increase the number of underrepresented minorities that attend UF. We're a super competitive institution, a top 10 public institution, aspiring to be top 5 public institutions. So how do you balance those aspirations with access and making sure that you provide an opportunity for as many students as possible, and particularly for underrepresented students and Hispanic and Latino students, is really important to me. I also think we need to focus increasing the number of underrepresented minority faculty that we have, particularly in the business school, as well as senior administrators that are in leadership roles. I can't tell you the number of times where I've had students who have shared with me, Dr. Sevilla, you're the only Hispanic faculty member that I know. I haven't seen anyone else, or a Black student that will come to me and say the same thing. There are very few underrepresented minority faculty members or leaders within the university. And I think part of inclusion is making sure that young students students and young leaders can see themselves in the future through the leaders that are around them. So as an educational institution, I think we can do a lot more in that space, and we have specific plans within the college to focus those efforts over the next 2 or 3 years. And then the last thing I would say is I'm really excited about our ability to think more broadly about how we can impact in this space beyond metrics. Metrics are great. Every company and every industry uses them, and we're no different. You saw the metrics on our website, so that's kind of what we all do. But beyond the numbers, what are we doing to make an impact? So, some things that I think about are, what does it mean to create a truly inclusive and welcoming environment? Where are we falling short? I had conversations throughout the summer with a number of our minority students to ask those questions and listen very intently, particularly after the George Floyd murder and all of the social and racial unrest that's taken place in the country, to do a lot more listening and to think about what our students are feeling and understand how those feelings can pivot to learning and how that learning can pivot to taking action. So really doing as much as we can to create the type of environment that our students expect and will want to have and will help them thrive. And then the other two things that I think are really easy to measure and hard to deliver. How do we teach our students, all of our students, not just our diversity students, about implicit bias and unconscious bias, and strengthen their ability to be diversity allies, to be advocates, to be champions, regardless of their race or of their heritage? How can we include our white students into these conversations? Because they're going to be part of these conversations within industry. And one, I want them to be great people and great citizens, but two, as it relates to their professional work, I want them to be as strong of advocates as possible, no matter what their race or heritage is, to be part of this conversation and to be a productive part of this conversation. And I think a big part of that is really recognizing and understanding bias. So I've been working with a startup company, and we've been doing some pilot programs with students about unconscious bias and how to understand it, to be cognizant of it, and to how to lead through it, as opposed to ignoring it and pretending like it doesn't exist. And then the last thing is, how can we continue to do more to provide best-in-class opportunities for our underrepresented students, for our Latino students, as it relates to career aspirations, and continue to support them not only in getting great jobs, we do that already, but support them beyond graduation in meaningful ways to help them achieve what I would define as life satisfaction, not just a great job and happy with the work that they do. That's important. But when they think about the role that they have and how it relates to who they are, what level of satisfaction do they derive from that? And can we prepare them during their time that they are here? And can we provide them opportunities where we can continue to engage with them well beyond their graduation?
That's very comprehensive and well-rounded. I like that. I think that a lot of colleges have a lot to learn, and like you said, those are areas of opportunities and steps that they should be aiming for. So yeah.
Well, and I think, David, especially, this has always been a passion of mine, and I can raise my hand like anyone else and say I can and should do more. But as I've reflected and as I've thought pretty extensively over the past couple of years in how we can do more, and those ideas have really, of course, come to the forefront this summer with all the things that have taken place. I think one of the things everyone can do is lean on our, become more aware of the world around us and how we can add value to it as opposed to detract value from it. But lean into our strengths. And so, there may be things that I do philanthropically or with nonprofits, or things that I can personally do outside of my day-to-day work. And I do those things, but I think it's inherent upon all of us. And so if I'm speaking for myself, this idea of what can you do as a leadership, as a leader and as an educator in higher ed to advance the opportunity for diversity, equity, and inclusion to get stronger within the country and within the world, starting with it here at the University of Florida, and not taking a passive approach, taking a very proactive approach to how can we utilize our positions, how can we utilize our influence, how can we utilize our sweat equity and our desire to make change happen, and really put that in motion. And so I think that's something that everybody can do, and I'm trying to do my part here within a university environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. That's very encouraging, especially for me that I went through some of the college courses, and I felt like there was a little more that could have been done while I was in my graduate school. So yeah, this is really good. So
excellent.
Thank you for it. Now, through your career, have you noticed any academic paths in which Latinos are underrepresented that are now showing promise to our community?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm going to answer it maybe in a little bit of a different way than you might have anticipated, because I think it might be more valuable to take a macro perspective versus sort of what I see here at the University of Florida, which may be similar to what others see, but may be different based upon geography or the companies that come to recruit on campus. So I wanted to share a couple trends that I think are relevant to the question that you asked. So in terms of industry, one of the things I love about my job is that I have the opportunity to engage with literally hundreds of executives and corporate recruiters in my role as a business school leader. And I can tell you that there's been a significant shift in the genuine interest that companies have in hiring diversity candidates, including Latinos. 20 years ago, this was not a topic of discussion. It wasn't a priority, where now these are regular conversations that we have with recruiters. So that in and of itself is a good thing. And I think part of the answer to this is if you dig a little bit into the research that's been produced, research shows that teams are better equipped to sell into diverse communities when they themselves have team members that represent that community, which of course makes sense. So in this example, if you have Latinos who are on a team that has helped shaping messaging and branding efforts, it's going to go a long way to making the marketing of that product or service much more effective when trying to speak to Latino consumers. So I think part of this is companies seeing that data and saying, well, we need to hire into these roles strategically if we want to be more successful into hiring into what you and I know is a rapidly growing consumer base for the Latino community, and will continue to grow over the next 50 years. So I think this strategic rationale really aligns nicely with more of the enthusiasm, more natural enthusiasm around creating more diverse and inclusive workplaces, and companies really wanting to hire more Latinos into the companies, and we've seen that here at UF, as I mentioned before. So I don't think that it's a good or bad thing. I think both of those things can live together, that there's a business proposition for that, and that there's also value in hiring Latinos into organizations. The second trend, I think, is one that's a bit more emerging, and one I hope to be able to play some role in strengthening over the next 10 to 20 years. So as I mentioned before, companies are really proactively hiring Latinos into terrific roles, leadership development programs. I just had a mentoring conversation 2 weeks ago with a student that was in one of my classes that I got to know really well. She's working at Google. She's in a leadership rotation with obviously a preeminent firm that many people would love to work for. And she is absolutely having a blast, just a terrific student. She's Latina. That's something that I don't want to say that 20 years ago, she wouldn't have gotten that role, but it's really great to see that the access points to those types of positions are really now much more in place, as I shared previously. The other thing that companies are doing, which I think is aligned with your question, but sort of in an indirect way, is that companies have really done a great job in creating employee resource groups, or ERGs, to foster diversity and inclusion and a sense of belonging within their organization. So, ERGs provide, these great opportunities for Latinos, for example, to find one another, to make connections, to build relationships, to network, to create friendships, again, didn't exist 20 years ago, now is in place and is a huge value add for helping Latinos feel comfortable and provide opportunities for them to network within their organization. So what I see as an emerging trend is how to sort of pivot that work, the ERGs, which a lot of times are predominantly social in nature. You and I work for the same company. You're in engineering, I'm in research and development. Otherwise, we wouldn't have known each other, but we connect through this Latino ERG, and we have a social night. We go out, we connect, we get together, and again, wonderful opportunities there. But one of the things that I'm interested in thinking about is, are there opportunities within these existing ERGs to create tailored leadership skill development programs that will help Latino leaders be more successful in ascending the corporate ladder within those companies. So while companies have done a phenomenal job with hiring more Latinos into their organizations, we still have this gap between the general population of what you would see in a company versus what you would see in the C-suite, or what you would see in the within the board of directors of a large firm. So how do we bridge that gap? There are a lot of ways to tackle that. And of course, one part of that is hiring in. But one of the things that I've had the opportunity to do a little bit of work around and had some conversations with some top companies about is this idea of creating very specific leadership skill development that is tailored for a Latino emerging leader audience, and to be able to deliver that within a corporate environment to help these individuals gain more access to promotions, to opportunities, and ultimately ascend into the senior level roles of organizations. So there's been a ton of growth that I'm so proud to report, and I see every single day, and companies come to us all the time now and say, we want to hire your best Latino students. I'm interested in that, and I'm also interested in what the pathway looks like for those great students once they start working to be able to achieve the top positions within those organizations.
Right, right. No, that's amazing. It makes me want to had enroll in your school. don't tell my my U of A counselors or.
I promise. Your secret is safe with me, but we are recording this, David. So you get to decide.
All right. So parents of Latins families are hold on a second. So yeah, so parents in the Latin family are one of the greatest influencers in making the decision of whether a student will go to college. And how do you sell the value of a college education to Latin parents who came from families without college, backgrounds, basically first generation students?
Yeah, there's a lot that is packed into that one question, and I think, one, there's a general question about the value proposition of colleges and universities that has changed over the past 10 to 15 years that I think we need to be cognizant of and make sure that we think about that as we continue to move forward with our programs and our student support services and how we think about career opportunities and long-term success of our graduates. And we've done a lot here at UF and within the Worthington College that I'm particularly proud of. But particularly as it relates to Latinx parents and aspiring students, I do think that there's additional coaching and insight that's necessary, particularly for first-generation students. And I'll lean back on my experiences with the Machen Florida Opportunity Scholars Program that I previously alluded to. One of my early discoveries, David, in working with these programs was the delta between the first-generation students and what they believed college was about, mm-hmm. and the students that were coming into the business school from more traditional upbringings as it relates to having one or two parents that went to college, even if it's not a diversity or a minority issue, but really just focusing on that question of first gen. And there was a massive gap there. In other words, students that were coming from a family that had college educated parents had a much more likely chance of knowing what to do without being told. They understood what classes to take. They understood how to get connected with student organizations. They understood where the resources were and how to take advantage of those resources. Where first generation students in many cases have not had that coaching and have not had that insight and have not had the guidance, whether that's from home or even within the K through 12 system, which is a whole nother conversation that at another time we could unpack. So I do think it is inherent upon us to help drive that point home. And I won't speak for the entire university in this way, although I think UF does a lot of great things, particularly with our first generation students, as I mentioned before, through this special program. But within the business school, one of the things that I think is a paramount significance to what our responsibility is. So there is a necessity to teach our students subject matter, right? They come in, and whether they want to be a finance major or a marketing major or an information systems major, we need to give them specific skills for them to be capable of being hired, and starting their career. That's ultimately our role. But I think much more time and attention needs to be paid, and we put a significant emphasis on that here within the Warrington College, on the career aspiration piece. What happens after college? So you're here and celebrating that you're here, but how much time and energy are you dedicating to yourself, not just in passing your classes, which of course is important, but thinking about what comes next, preparing for your first internship, lining up very specific skills and competencies so that when you get that internship, you're able to stand out and get a job offer. How to understand what careers look like earlier than you might otherwise if we did put that in place, to allow you to know what that path looks like. So getting back to your question, I do think it is inherent for all colleges and universities, for their Latino students and for their parents, and particularly if they are first generation, to be far more deliberate in painting the picture holistically of what college is. It is not just getting in and then you take classes and you get a degree. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made that the way that I define it is, this is an ecosystem where you are self-discovering about who you are destined to be. And every time you have an experience, that experience has value, whether you loved it or whether you hated it, right, to help you discover who you're going to be when you're 30, who you're going to be when you're 40. That if our students could look forward into the future, that person who would be begging them to having that conversation with themselves to say, please use this opportunity to take advantage of all the resources that were here. That's what we have to do for our first generation students or for our Latino students, is make sure that that is incredibly clear and that we are proactive in providing those opportunities, as opposed to assuming that they're going to come here and know how to capitalize on them. And that's where I put a lot of my work and effort here as Dean of the Heavener School, and what we try to do for all of our students, but really with an emphasis on our first generation and our underrepresented minority and Latino students.
No, thank you. Because that's really what's needed to be done on, I think, every school. When they do an outreach for first generation, I don't think that the majority of those students really understand the process of academia, right, and how to, sometimes things so simple as how to study, how to prepare for finals and things like that. So yep. Yeah, absolutely. So since we're doing all of these interviews for the Hispanic Heritage Month, we're asking our speakers the following question: how do you keep your Hispanic heritage alive?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this question. There's a lot of different ways that I could go with that, but I'm going to sort of start with sort of how I think about leadership development and then make it personal on the back end. So in my leadership work, whether it's courses that I teach here at UF or whether it's consulting that I do in industry, my framework for leadership development is a simple three-tiered process. It starts with leading self, then leading others, and then leaving a legacy. And so I think this framework can also be a guiding force for how Hispanics embrace their heritage and maximize their career and life success along the way. And here's what I mean by that. So self-awareness, which is this first component of leading self, to me, I think is one of the most fundamental forces of leadership. How well do you know yourself? And of course, many people bristle at that notion because they say, well, of course I know myself. I've lived with myself my entire life. But the reality is that many of us don't know ourselves as well as we think, because we put up blinders of taking in information that we like and pushing information out that we don't particularly like. So, thinking about this first idea of loving yourself, embracing who you are, and getting to know you better than anybody else in the building, including, of course, your Hispanic heritage, to me is a massively important part of not only keeping your heritage alive, but allowing you to utilize that for benefit. Because I think when you do that, you create a level of authenticity. And authenticity is something that we talk a lot about when it comes to Latin heritage and how to present ourselves at work and things of that nature. And a lot of people struggle with imposter syndrome and can I be my true self in a working environment? And I think, my experience, and this again, it's not research-based, it's just my own personal experiences, is the more that you know yourself really, really well, that delivers a sense of confidence that allows for you to show yourself in an authentic way that people appreciate, even if it's a little bit different than what they may perceive as someone who is not Hispanic. And so that authenticity creates credibility. There's research that does get into the more authentic you are, the more credible you seem that you are perceived to be. And so I think for Hispanic leaders, that authenticity takes on a special meaning because of that struggle that can sometimes be in place of, can I be myself, or do I need to sort of shun some of my personality or some of my attributes to fit into a dominant white culture if that's where they are. So I think leading self is really, really important. The leading others piece, you have to get that leading self component right, because if you don't have a strong sense of self, if you have lack of self-confidence, it's going to be really hard for you to showcase yourself in an authentic way that galvanizes people towards your way of thinking, towards allowing you to be influential, towards allowing you to have the type of impact that you want to have. So those two things are indelibly tied. The better you know yourself, your genuine version of yourself, the better you're able to showcase that to others in a natural way that allows people to feel more comfortable with you leading them. So when it comes to leadership as a Latino, then you're going to be better equipped to be able to do that if you're not wondering and second guessing, is this possible for me to lead this group because of my heritage, or do I have to do something different? So again, that authenticity just comes forward naturally. And one of the pivots that everyone makes within their career is going from being an individual star performer to understanding how to get the best out of others, to really harnessing human capital and being able to build glorious teams that perform exceptionally well, that represent the company and the team in ways that everyone can be proud of. So leading others is a quintessential part of that. And I think if Hispanic leaders can keep their authenticity while they lead others, then they're in a position to go to that final stage, which is leaving a legacy. And David, one of the things that's probably been the most powerful part of my work when engaging with Latino leaders, I've had the opportunity to do some of these coaching sessions and some of these leadership programs where I've worked with mid-level Latino leaders, and some of the most dynamic conversations have come around this idea of, gosh, well, it's so hard to break through the ceiling. It's so hard to get into that, into the executive, into the executive suite. I'm thinking about a meeting I had recently where, we were talking about a leadership idea, and one of the leaders in the room said, this sounds great. How do I, I'm a Latina. I'm the only female, and I'm the only Hispanic within a group of 10 people on a team. Yeah. How do I get them to see, how do I harness my leadership in a way that's authentic without pivoting to being something that I'm not? And that gets back to the leading legacy piece. I think when I think about this gap that I mentioned before about the number of Hispanics that work in organizations versus the number that are in executive leadership positions, right? This idea of leaving a legacy really has to, deals a lot with resiliency and how to embrace the challenges that we might have as Latino leaders to say it might be a little bit more difficult. There might be challenges that my white counterpart does not have. But if I give up, if I'm passive, if I pivot to being something that I'm not, then it's going to be that much more difficult for the person that follows in my footsteps. So going back to the example that I gave, when that person is successful, when she's successful, that next generation meeting within that same company may have 3 Latinos. That makes it easier for each one of those to show their authentic self. But that legacy piece, I think, is one of the best ways for us to keep our heritage alive and say, it's not about acquiescing, and it's not about being something that we are not. It is about embracing who we are, aligning it with the values of the company, and then using that to be a unique subject matter expert and a unique value proposition within the organization that will allow for not only your own individual success, but for the leaders of the organization to say, we need more of that within this company, so that those next generation leaders, it makes it a little bit easier for them to aspire to have the roles that we would like to have today.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the recent conversations that we've had about acclimation and assimilation.
Yes.
For Latinos. So I think you hit it right on the spot. So as we're wrapping up our interview, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to share any projects that you're working on. Is there anything in the horizon right now?
Yeah, so I love macro strategic thinking and innovation and ideation. So this is a great question for us to finish on. In terms of projects here within the Warrington College, I'll quickly mention 3. One, the university as well as the College of Business is really embracing artificial intelligence. We just secured a major multi-million-dollar gift to create the largest AI supercomputer on any university campus. And so within the business school, we are pivoting our curriculum to embrace business analytics in a way that will allow for the next generation of our student leaders to be at the forefront of the transition of the world of work, the digitization and the AI transition that's happening within industry. Our students will have the skills, no matter what their major is, whether they want to deploy that in finance or marketing or technology, they'll have the ability to do that. So that's the first. The second is we are really focusing on a dramatic expansion of leadership skill development. And we're using technology to be able to do that. So we partnered with a firm that's created a customized app. So imagine if you were a student and you were able to curate every activity that you would do on campus that had anything to do with leadership skill development. And we've aligned that with specific competencies that we believe recruiters want to hire our students for. So in addition to having a major and having a GPA and companies that will come to hire our students because of the academic skills that they have created, we're creating essentially a totally new way for students to showcase their leadership acumen and their leadership skill development by using an app that students will, they of course find it very cool that they can go on their phone and they can put in all of these activities. It shows them how they're growing and developing. They get badges, they get rewards for it. So it's very digital in its user interface for our students. So that's something that I think has the chance to be pretty profound and is pretty new. There aren't a lot of business schools that are focusing on a technology and a product like that. And then I think the last thing that we're doing at the university level is continuing to embrace digital learning. So we've been a pioneer of online education for a number of years. And of course, with all of the COVID changes, we've had to lean on those experiences, and we've had to sort of double down on what higher education will look like 5 years from now and 10 years from now. So we're putting a lot of time and energy into what that right balance is between the efficiency and the effectiveness of online learning, while still, of course, creating live and dynamic engagements within a university environment. So those are the 3 things that I'm working on here within the University of Florida. And then in terms of personal projects, David, I'm crazy fired up about this idea of leadership skill development for emerging Latino leaders. So I've built a leadership model that I've called the Latino Leadership Lens, which is essentially taking classic leadership theory and training that I deploy in a number of different sectors, both here on campus and within industry, but then sort of pivoting it specifically to a Latino audience, and ideally operating through ERGs within companies to say, for example, if you have hired 20, 30, 50 new Latino professionals within your organization, putting that group through a very specific set of training that will give them training that on the surface would have value, right? Would help them navigate through the early stages of their professional career. But by embedding it within an ERG, also creates an affinity group, also creates the opportunity to have very specific conversations about how Latinos build relationships, how Latinos think about being nimble within corporate communities, how we think about resiliency as an asset, to be able to make these conversations more personal, to hopefully allow for the outcomes to be even more impactful. So I really do hope that for the, over the next couple of years that we'll be able to do more in this space, and that'll be something that more companies will look to embrace as part of their ERG programs to help us bridge that gap between the number of Latinos that are in organizations versus the number of Latinos who are in senior level positions and are serving on boards. So anything that I can do in that space, that's something that I'm crazy fired up about.
Yeah, that sounds exciting.
Yeah,
I can't wait to hear, the outcome of that project.
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to talk more about it.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. I was hoping that you will give me, a lot of content with the questions that I gave you, and this is a gold mine. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, this was a lot of fun, David. So I was happy to do it. And whatever other projects you're working on with LBSB, if I can be involved, or as that team is thinking about how to engage the different speakers and different opportunities as that gets fired up, then I'm really looking forward to being a part of that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes. Now, do you want me to stick on? You said you were going to end the recording, or
yeah, just 1 second.